And one of the things that really came to my attention was I was in Phoenix, Arizona about probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I was on a golf trip, and I went to a restaurant with about 8 of my friends, and it was an Italian restaurant, and we sat down, and the first thing on the menu were PI mussels. And I thought, fantastic, there's mussels here from our province in Phoenix. So the waiter came over, and I said to the waiter, are these mussels any good? And the waiter said to me, they are the best mussels in the world. And I said to my friends, I'm going to try a little experiment here. I go, can you tell me exactly where this PI is? And the waiter looked at me and took an educated guess, considering it was an Italian restaurant, and said, I think it's a little island off the coast of Italy. So it's a clear indication of how we need to do more to promote our province, to sell ourselves. You know, I travel around the world to China, India, all over the U.S. And, you know, when you mention Canada, people still think of Toronto, Vancouver, the Rockies. They don't necessarily think of Atlantic Canada or Prince Edward Island. I think that's my job to make sure I get out there and do more promotions. You know, because I think that PEI is a great spot to live, work, and play. We're small. You know, you can travel between Cavendish Beach and downtown Charlottetown in the same time as it takes you to drive 4 or 5 blocks in downtown Toronto. Our housing prices are relatively low. Our crime rates are low. You know, we've got great schools. We're very fortunate to have the University of Prince Edward Island with a state-of-the-art vet school. Our Holland College is a great institution. So we're a great spot to live, work, and raise a family. But like every jurisdiction across Canada, across the world, the last 4 years have been challenging. When I first got elected in 2007, the world economy was booming. And I remember the first meeting I went to with the other premiers, the big issue we were debating that day is what we were going to do over the next 3 or 4 years with regards to labor shortages. Where were we going to find all the workers to fill all the jobs that were being created in Canada? 1 year later, our big issue was dealing with perhaps the worst recession to hit since the Great Depression. How things changed tremendously in a year. And the last 4 years have been challenging. Prince Edward Island, you know, we were a little bit sheltered from the overall recession. We probably, actually, we didn't fall into recession, but it didn't mean that it didn't have negative impacts in our province. But, you know, we've seen some positives over the last year or two, and just to offer a few indicators, in 2011, Prince Edward Island actually had the fastest population growth in the country, and between 2008 and 2010, during the worst part of the recession, as I mentioned, PEI actually had the strongest economic growth in the country. Our employment grew by about 3,000 jobs during the recession, and during the latter half of 2011, our job growth in Prince Edward Island was the second most rapid in Canada behind Alberta. Housing starts grew by 24% from 2010 to 2011, the fastest growth rate in the country. Our total labor income increased by 4.1%, and on a great note, farm cash receipts increased by 17.5%. Having said all that, we're no different than any other province in terms of grappling with the financial reality of today compared to 5 or 10 years ago. We've got a budget of approximately $1.6 billion. Our deficit this year is going to be around $75 million. We've got a 3-year plan to be able to get us back into a balanced budget or surplus situation. How we're going to do that? We're going to have to reduce down government expenditures by about probably 3% across every government department, with the exception of healthcare that will grow by about 3.5%. We're also going to have to try to grow our private sector, grow our economy, increase our tax base, and one of the things that we're doing there, which is what I like to call good public policy but bad politics. You've seen it here in Ontario, you've seen it fail in British Columbia, but we are a province, the last province east of Manitoba not to introduce the HST, and we just recently announced that the HST is coming into effect in Prince Edward Island on April 1st, 2013. While it's not an easy thing to implement, we know from every indicator that it will help our economy. Our farmers have been asking for it, our fishers and our business community, and we believe that it will help level the playing field for our businesses in Prince Edward Island to help them get on the right track. Some of the major, I guess, challenges that we have in Prince Edward Island with regards to our budget are no different than what every other province is dealing with. And I'm just going to mention them now, and I'll talk a little bit more about them later on. First and foremost, it's the increased cost to healthcare. Over the last 5 to 10 years, our healthcare costs in Prince Edward Island have grown by about 7 to 10% a year. Continuing along down that path is going to be impossible. While it would be easy to do, it's something that we're not going to be able to do if we want to have a sustainable healthcare system and a system that we'll be able to afford. The second challenge for our province is federal revenue. Whether or not we're talking equalization, transfers that come to the province, we have a huge reliance on federal transfers. I'm not going to apologize for it, but it's something that we need to work with our federal counterparts to be able to make sure that they realize that every province has its own uniqueness, and that they have to realize that one program that they introduce as a federal government does not necessarily fit every single jurisdiction across the country. Our third big challenge, like everywhere else, has to do with the decline in the equity markets, and that has to do with our pension plans. Like everywhere else, we're experiencing some extreme challenges around our pension plans, and it's something we're going to have to address. And I don't think into the future you're going to see pension plans set up the same way as they have been in the past, because quite frankly, they're unsustainable. But I'll touch on some of those a little later on. I do want to talk about how we are adjusting our economy in Prince Edward Island, how we're modernizing our economy in Prince Edward Island. We're still unique in the country in the fact that our 3 largest industries are still agriculture, fisheries, and tourism. So in other words, our 3 largest industries are still seasonal in nature. Whether we like it or not, you can't grow potatoes or catch lobster in January. So we need to make sure that when we're dealing with the federal government, they realize that if you're talking EI programs or different support programs, that Prince Edward Island is in a different situation than a lot of other jurisdictions. Now, what we're trying to do to help those economies, as you heard, farm cash receipts went up substantially last year. We're expecting that to continue to grow. We grow about 80,000 acres of potatoes. We're the largest potato producer in Canada. We have huge companies like the McCains, Cavendish Farms, the Irvings that are located in Prince Edward Island, but we're also diversifying into soybeans and different commodities. Our big issue is that 80% of our exports are still going to the United States of America. If the United States of America, their economy doesn't do well, it affects us tremendously. That's why I've been on the road to India, to China, to different jurisdictions around the world, because I believe we need to expand where our exports are going. And one of the areas that's going to be extremely important in is fisheries, because if you really look at it, if you're talking lobsters, oysters, mussels, a lot of those are considered luxury products. And with the slowdown in the U.S. economy, it's hurt us tremendously, but we're lucky that we're seeing a large demand in other jurisdictions such as Japan, China, and India for a lot of our products. Of course, our 3rd largest industry is tourism. Now, in tourism, Prince Edward Island is an oasis, but the problem is we need to get more people knowing about Prince Edward Island coming. The majority of our tourists still come from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario. So I want to make sure that other jurisdictions around the world know more about us, know what we have to offer. And like I say, there's nowhere else in Canada where it doesn't matter where you are in Prince Edward Island, you're no more than a half-an-hour drive to a beautiful beach. We've got great golf courses, great arts and culture in our province. And I think that from a tourism perspective, as we see the world economy improve and the U.S. economy, hopefully we'll see a lot of growth there. But what we've tried to do over the last number of years is expand on our traditional industries. There's really 4 areas where we're concentrating on right now. Some may surprise some people in the room, but aerospace, bioscience, IT back office supports, and renewable energy are 4 areas that are contributing a lot. Our aerospace industry probably has over 1,000 employees, over $500 million in exports from our province. We have large companies such as Vector Aerospace, Honeywell, MDS, coating, to mention just a few. We see a lot of growth potential. It's been growing by about 10% a year over the last number of years, and we think that we can continue to capitalize on the aerospace industry as we move forward. Biosciences and nutrasciences, I believe, perhaps has the largest growth potential. As we can extract from our natural elements in our province. Research can take place anywhere in the world. We're extremely fortunate that we have the Atlantic Veterinary College in Prince Edward Island, so it gives us a lot of different opportunities around the bioscience and nutrasciences industry. We have large companies like BioVectra, Novartis, OmniActives. They're in our province, but what we need for those sectors and for all those sectors is an educated population, and I'll touch a little bit about that a little bit after. The other big industry is IT and back office supports. We're very fortunate that we've got companies such as CGI, Invesco. I just returned back from India, where they were looking for a near-shore location in North America, and a company called Emphasis, which is a subsidiary of Hewlett-Packard, has agreed to set up 300 positions in our province, and that is going to be an area that I believe is going to be extremely important as we move forward. Renewable energy, you heard we're at 15% in terms of our wind capacity. We're actually now getting closer to 20, and within the next 3 years, about 30% of our electricity in the province of Prince Edward Island is going to come from wind power. We have a great wind resource. And I think that the future is going to be around renewable energy, and I think that as we continue to develop our wind power in Prince Edward Island, it's going to contribute a lot as we move forward. That's really where our economy is going. I'm optimistic about it. We're seeing a lot of positive signs in our export markets, but it's about creating new markets around the world. And I think all of Canada, especially Atlantic Canada, Ontario, Quebec, we've been too reliant on the United States, and it's time that we started looking more broadly to different jurisdictions around the world. And in fact, in 2008, the premiers realized that ourselves, and we did a COF trade mission to China, and this year as well in October, the premiers of Canada will be making another trade mission to Canada. I do need to touch on some issues with regards to the federal government. Two issues I want to touch on are health care, and a word that's not that popular, but I believe it's essential to our Canadian fabric, and that's equalization. I'm going to touch on both just briefly. In terms of healthcare is a dynamic that, as Canada, we're very fortunate to have the system we do have. It is a good system, the system that we do have. You hear more negatives about healthcare than you hear about positives, but the problem is the media never talks about the positives. So when we go out and poll healthcare, we say what has to be fixed in our Canadian system or in our provincial system, and probably 80% of respondents say healthcare needs to be fixed, it's broken. When you ask those same individuals what was their last experience like with healthcare, over 80% say it was extremely positive. So there's a bit of a disconnect there between what's exactly happening in healthcare and the experiences that people have. So I think that we need to educate Canadians and Islanders in terms of the great system that we do have, but I believe the federal government has an essential role to play when it comes to healthcare. Back when healthcare was first introduced in Canada, it was a 50-50 funded program in our country. Today, the federal government funds about 20% of healthcare costs across the country. Recently, you all heard that the federal government does not even want to sit down with the provinces to talk about a new healthcare deal. They just basically put the offer on the table and said, take it or leave it. Well, obviously, we're going to take the money. But why do we want to sit down with the federal government? Do we want to sit down with the federal government to bash them or to make them look bad? We don't. We want to sit down as premiers with the federal government to let them know that there's changing dynamics within our healthcare system today. What are those changing dynamics? The changing dynamics is that we have an aging population. Our population is living a lot longer. There's new technologies out there, and our system needs to adapt from the acute care system that we have today to a system that's going to allow us to help take care of that aging population. And the dollars that have been put on the table are fine, but we also need to help restructure our healthcare system in Canada. And I think it would be extremely beneficial if the federal government sat down with us and was a constructive partner. Having said that, they weren't willing to go down that road. So as premiers, we decided that it was time that we started working more collaboratively together to start to make a difference. Right now in Canada, we have 13 distinctive, totally differently run healthcare systems in our country. In Victoria, in January, as premiers, we named myself and Premier Brad Wall from Saskatchewan to form the first ever Health Innovation Working Group. What is that Innovation Working Group about? It's really about finding innovation and synergies across our country. You know, if they're offering certain services in Ontario that they're not offering in PEI or that they are offering in British Columbia, why are we offering different services? What are different provinces doing better in one area that other provinces aren't? How can we work together? And I think that Brad and I have a huge job in front of us. We're not going to reinvent the wheel overnight, but what we're going to do is we're going to sit down and we're going to look at constructive ways to improve our healthcare system, to make it more adjustable, more adaptable to the changing demographics in our country. The last topic that I'm going to talk about the federal government has to do with equalization. Now, I realize equalization in some jurisdictions is a dirty word or a word that people don't like to talk about. Essentially speaking, equalization is something that is extremely important to our country. Basically, every major country in the world, most OECD countries, all have equalization systems. Canada's right now, in my opinion, is not working as well as it should. And just to put things in perspective, in 2011-2012, the cost of the equalization program represents about 0.85% of Canada's nominal GDP. This ratio is significantly lower than the annual historic average of 1.02. And in fact, according to a study published by the OECD in 2007, 16 countries were analyzed, and equalization represented 2.3% of their GDPs. So when you really put it in perspective, equalization is not draining the bank. It's not giving one province an advantage over another. And I just want to touch on that because I think that for too many Canadians, they're uneducated about the equalization program. They make comments without knowing what they're talking about. It's like going and seeing a surgeon and trying to tell the surgeon, if you don't know anything about surgery, what they're doing. If you don't understand equalization, sometimes the criticisms that are put in the newspapers or in editorials are totally falsehoods. And I think that what you have to look with regards to equalization, it does not make one province richer than another. The equalization program across the country actually only equalizes those provinces that receive it up to a national average. Prince Edward Island does not have the fiscal capacity of Alberta, even after equalization. They still have a much richer fiscal capacity than what we do. The other misconception, and I'll touch on a couple of them, is it has nothing to do with have and have not provinces. Right now, if you look at Canada, the provinces that do not receive equalization are provinces that have oil, gas, and potash. British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador are the only provinces in Canada that do not receive equalization. Now, for the longest time, you'd always hear, and I'll say it, Central Canadians, but even Atlantic Canadians or Western Canadians say, you know, why in Atlantic Canada don't you just get your act together and do more like we're doing in Alberta or more like we're doing in Ontario, and you'll get off equalization and you'll stop being so dependent on us. Well, I like to point out right now that Newfoundland and Labrador is the second wealthiest province in our country. Now, what has Newfoundland and Labrador changed over the last 20 years compared to any other province? They've changed really absolutely nothing except for one thing. They started opening up some oil wells. Because they open up those oil wells now, Newfoundland and Labrador has the second highest fiscal capacity in the country behind Alberta. So I think from that perspective, Canadians need to realize that what equalization allows us to do is whether or not you live in downtown Toronto or northern Ontario or Prince Edward Island or northern British Columbia, it allows us just to have a comparable level of service for a comparable taxation rate. Now, you see all the time where you get some individuals, I won't mention any names or newspapers, that would say, you know, Alberta, or now you could say Newfoundland and Labrador even, is subsidizing the social programs in Quebec. Is that the case? No, it's not. Because what happens is Quebec basically gets their fiscal capacity brought up to an average. But at the same time, they tax at a higher rate than what every other province does across the country. That's how they pay for $5 a day kindergarten or early childhood education. They don't do it by taking equalization dollars. They do it by taxing more than every other jurisdiction. So from my perspective, we need to reanalyze our equalization system. We need to stop thinking that it's a bad thing for Canada, that you're taking away from one jurisdiction and giving to another. That's not the case. This is all revenue that the federal government has. Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador still have a much higher fiscal capacity after equalization than what Prince Edward Island does and Ontario, for that matter, right now. And just to put this in perspective, every province in Canada at one point in time has received equalization. So it's not a matter of in one province you're not trying hard enough or you get dollars, so in other words, you don't have to try and improve your economy. Prince Edward Island's, on a per capita basis, the largest equalization receiving province. But we work every single day to try and improve our economy and to make sure that Prince Edward Island is going to be a better place. And as I conclude, I just want to talk a little bit about what I believe we have to do as a country to make sure that we're going to be competitive into the future. We're extremely fortunate right now that we're rich in minerals and oil and gas and potash and lots of natural resources. But if we want to be competitive into the future, our secret is going to be education. And education from the perspective that making sure that we have the smartest population, because that's what companies are looking for. That's what the next oil is going to be. It's going to be smart people. And in Prince Edward Island's circumstance, what we've done is we've taken an early childhood education system, we've reformed it to make it one of the best in the country right now so that any island child, regardless of their socioeconomic background, can get the best possible start in life. We took kindergarten, which was private, we moved it into the public school system. I hear my good friend Dalton McGuinty talk all the time about that was one of his major accomplishments. We announced it at the same time and got it done a lot faster. But it's a major thing that will help our province in the long run. We've put major investments into our schools, into science, into math, into those areas, and we've made our post-secondary education more accessible. And I think as you move into the future, making post-secondary education more accessible is going to be a key to our country. Today, higher education is still a privilege. It no longer should be a privilege, it should be a right. But how are we going to get there? We're going to get there by making sure that there's more programs available to help young people that want to get to a post-secondary education, make it more available for them as we move forward. I'm positive about our country. I've sat now around the First Minister's table for the last 5 years. Like I indicated, in 2007, things were rough, or things were great. 2008, things got rough again. Things are starting to improve. We're starting to see job growth in most provinces across the country. The U.S. economy is still teetering, but getting better. Canada as a nation, and even our provinces, those ones in deficit situations, you just have to look at what's happening in Europe. We're doing better than most, and most provincial governments are trying to get their financial house in order. So I'm extremely positive about our country. It's about diversifying our industries in our respective provinces and in our country, and about making sure that we're ready for that next boom that's out there. And that next boom is going to be making sure that we have the best possible educated population in the world. Thank you very much for your time today.